By noon, the light had gone wrong. It was not yet dark, but the high country had lost its color. The pines stood black against a sky the shade of old pewter, and the pale grass along the southern ridge bent in long, nervous waves. Clara Sterling noticed the change before the horse did. She smelled rain on stone, then the sharper bite that came before lightning. She stopped at the last cedar post and opened the small notebook she carried inside her coat. The pages were soft at the corners from use. A strip of cloth marked the survey figures. 187 paces from the split boulder to the wash. She counted again, 179. 8 paces did not disappear by themselves. Clara looked down the slope. Far below, beyond a seam of granite and winter yellow grass, the Vance cattle moved like dark seeds scattered over the flats. They were supposed to remain west of the old creek bed. 3 of them grazed on the wrong side. She wrote the number in the margin and underlined it once. The bay gelding shifted beneath her. His ears flicked toward the mountains. Clara gathered the reins, not tightly, only enough to remind him she was there. "We are going home," she said. The animal blew through his nostrils. White vapor streamed from them and vanished in the wind. Clara slid the notebook away and checked the leather cinch with the side of her boot. It had loosened twice that morning. The strap was old but sound, and she had promised herself she would replace it after the next freight wagon came through the settlement. There were always things that could be replaced after the next payment, the next calf, the next clear week. A better stove lid, 2 panes of glass, a new trace chain, a cinch. She turned the horse north. The cabin lay 3 miles away. On a summer day, 3 miles meant very little. In a mountain storm, distance became a debt collected all at once. The wind struck her from the west. It came down the ravine hard enough to flatten the gelding's mane against his neck. Clara lowered her head and kept him moving. Sleet ticked against the brim of her hat, light at first, then steady. Each pellet made a dry little sound on the leather before melting into cold water. She had been married to Nishi for 28 days. The number rose in her mind because numbers came when feelings were inconvenient. 28 mornings at the same table. 28 nights beneath the same roof. 28 days of dividing work without discussing anything that could not be weighed, repaired, planted, signed, or defended. The marriage had solved 2 problems. Clara needed a legal household after her father had signed away nearly everything attached to her name. Nishi needed a co-claimant who could read registry language and stand before a court that had learned to ignore him. A circuit judge had joined them beside a wagon wheel in the settlement yard. The judge had smelled of onions and tobacco. Nishi had said yes in a low voice. Clara had said it clearly enough for the clerk to hear. No flowers, no promises, no lie between them. That suited her. She had spent years learning the cost of promises. Another gust shoved the gelding sideways. His hoof struck exposed stone and slipped. Clara steadied him, but the animal's breathing had changed. It was too fast, pulling high in his chest. She looked toward the line shack 1/2 mile east. The roof sagged, but it might hold. Then lightning flared behind the ridge, turning every tree white for a single instant. The thunder arrived before the light had fully died. The gelding reared. Clara leaned forward, trying to stay with him. The saddle rolled beneath her. For one startled second, she felt the entire weight of it slide around the horse's barrel. Then the cinch tore with a flat crack. The sky turned, the ground rose. Her shoulder hit first. Her right boot caught between the stirrup and a stone, and something inside her ankle broke with a sound small enough to be lost in the storm. Pain emptied the world. When it returned, she was on her side in mud so cold it burned. Rain struck her face. The gelding crashed away through the brush, dragging the saddle for several yards before the stirrup leather came free. Clara saw him once between the pines, eyes wide, reins flying. Then he was gone. She tried to sit. The pain in her leg climbed from her heel to her spine and turned her stomach. She folded forward, one palm pressed into the mud, and waited for the blackness at the edge of her sight to recede. "All right," she whispered. The words were not comfort. They were an instruction. She checked herself as she would inspect damaged equipment. Left shoulder bruised, perhaps badly. Hands moving, ribs painful but holding, no blood in her mouth. Right ankle. She looked once and wished she had not. The boot sat at the wrong angle. Rainwater ran under her collar. Her wool skirt had already taken on the weight of a soaked blanket. The temperature was falling quickly. She could feel it in her fingers. A shelf of rock stood uphill, no more than 15 yards away. The overhang beneath it was shallow, but it broke the wind. Clara rolled onto her stomach. The movement dragged her injured leg and drove a cry between her teeth. She swallowed it. Crying out would not shorten the distance. She pulled herself forward by roots and stones. Mud packed beneath her nails. Her left shoulder trembled under her weight. Twice she stopped because the ground seemed to tilt, and once she laid her cheek against the earth and counted breaths until she could see clearly again. At the overhang, she turned and dragged her leg in after her. The rock was wet and offered little warmth, but the wind no longer struck her directly. She sat with her back against granite, both hands wrapped above the injured ankle to keep it from shifting. The storm closed over the ridge. Clara knew what came next. The knowledge was almost a relief. Wet clothes, falling temperature, no horse, no splint, no one who knew precisely where she had gone. She had told Nishi she would inspect the southern posts and return before the noon meal. But he might assume she had taken shelter. A sensible man did not ride into lightning because a practical wife was late. She pictured him at the cabin, moving the flour barrel away from the leaky wall, bringing the hens into the shed, latching the barn doors with the extra chain. He would work in silence, as he always did. She did not picture him searching. To keep her mind from scattering, Clara recited the winter stores: 4 sacks of wheat, 1 sack of beans, 2 kegs of nails, 29 yards of unused wire, not 30, because she had repaired the north gate 3 days earlier, 1 jar of lamp oil, half a box of matches. Her teeth began to strike together. She pressed her lips tight, but the shaking moved through her shoulders and down her arms. The pain in her ankle had become a heavy pulse. Each beat seemed farther away than the last. The light thinned. Clara watched water drip from the lip of the rock. It gathered, swelled, fell. Gathered, swelled, fell. She thought of her father's account book, the one he had kept beneath the bar at the boarding house. He had written debts in red pencil and payments in black ink. Clara had been 16 when she understood that he had placed her name on the page beside the amount he owed a cattle buyer. He had not sold her then. He had merely begun considering it. Years later, when the sum grew large enough, he called the arrangement practical. Practical had become a word Clara trusted only when she used it herself. Her eyes closed. A sound reached her through the rain. At first, she mistook it for stones rolling in the wash. Then it came again, evenly spaced, hooves. Clara opened her eyes and reached for the small knife in her boot. Her fingers would not close around the handle. She tried again. A dark horse emerged between the pines, moving slowly with its head low. The rider sat deep in the saddle. Water ran from the brim of his hat and from the ends of his black hair. Nishi saw her before she could call. He brought the horse to a stop, dismounted, and left the reins hanging. The animal remained where he placed it. He crossed the mud without haste, though Clara could see the force in each step. His coat was soaked through. A coil of rope hung over one shoulder, and a folded blanket was tied behind his saddle. Clara tightened her hands around her leg. "The gelding threw me," she said before he reached her. The cinch failed. Nishi crouched. His gaze moved over her face, shoulder, hands, and finally the shape beneath her skirt. "How long? I do not know. Can you feel your toes?" "Yes." "Move them." She did. Pain flashed white through her skull. Nishi's jaw hardened, but his voice remained level. "The skin is not broken. That is good. You should not be here." He untied the blanket from his shoulder and shook it open. It was thick wool, dark with rain along one edge. He wrapped it around her upper body, then tucked the corners beneath her arms. The cloth smelled of smoke, horse, and crushed sage. "The ridge took the gelding home without you," he said. "I came to learn why." The simplicity of the answer unsettled her more than any declaration would have. He examined the slope, the mud, and the angle of her leg. "I will carry you to the horse, then I will carry you down the wash. The animal cannot take both of us safely on this ground. That is 2 miles. Yes, I can use a branch of sakura." "No." The word was quiet, not harsh. He met her eyes. "The bone has moved. If you stand, it may break through the skin." Clara looked away. Water ran from her hair into her mouth. "I am heavy in wet clothes, I know. You could fall, I know that also." He shifted closer but did not touch her. "I am going to put one arm behind your back and one beneath your knees. The first movement will hurt more than the others." Clara nodded once. Nishi slid his arm behind her shoulders. His other hand supported her uninjured calf and the space behind both knees, keeping the broken ankle free. He lifted in one steady motion. Pain tore through her. Clara caught the front of his vest and held on. She heard herself make a sound, low and broken, and hated it. Nishi did not speak until her breathing returned. Look at the button on my collar, he said. What? The brass one. Look at it. She focused on the button. It was scratched across the middle and one edge had gone green. Breathe when it rises, he said. Let the breath go when it falls. His stride made the button move up, down, down. Clara followed it because there was nothing else to follow. He carried her to his horse, but he did not attempt to mount. Instead, he looped the reins over his wrist and began walking. The horse came behind them, placing each hoof carefully in the mud. The descent was worse than Clara had imagined. Water rushed along the trail in brown sheets. Pine needles made the stones slick. Twice Nishi stopped to test the ground with his boot before taking the next step. Once his heel slid, and his whole body dropped several inches. Clara's fingers closed around his collar. He widened his stance, regained his footing, and continued. You may put me down, she said through her teeth. No, you need both hands. I have both hands where they are needed. The rain thickened into sleet. It struck the blanket and melted against the warmth trapped beneath. Nishi turned his body whenever the wind changed, taking the weather on his back. Clara waited for his breathing to become ragged. It deepened, but it did not break. She waited for the first annoyed sigh, the first small sign that she had become too much. It never came. After some time, she said, the saddle is likely ruined. Nishi stepped over a fallen branch, perhaps. The rigging can be saved if the tree did not tear it. Perhaps the gelding may have cut himself. He was at the barn when I left. Clara opened her eyes. He came back? Yes. With the saddle, with half of it. She let out a breath that might have been a laugh if she had remembered how. That sounds expensive. The horse can heal. Leather can be stitched. He looked down at her then, briefly. You are not leather. The words settled somewhere beneath the pain. At the tree line, the storm changed its voice. The sharp hiss through pine needles became a broad roar over open grass. The cabin was still out of sight, hidden by snow and the curve of the land. Clara had stopped feeling her hands. How far? Across the pasture. That is not a distance. It is the distance we have left. She wanted to argue, but the effort slipped away. Her head rested against his chest. Beneath wet cloth and leather, his heart struck a slow, hard rhythm. I am cold, she said. It was the first admission she had made to him that did not contain a solution. His arms tightened slightly. I know. The cabin appeared as a darker shape inside the snow. Nishi reached the porch, climbed the 2 steps, and drove his shoulder against the door. The latch lifted. Wind followed them inside. He kicked the door shut and dropped the bar into place. Silence landed around them. The cabin was cold, but it was still. No rain struck Clara's face. No mud shifted beneath her. She smelled ash, old coffee, leather, and the faint sweetness of dried apples hanging from a beam. Nishi carried her to the bed. Fear moved through her so quickly that it arrived before thought. Her grip on his vest hardened. There was only one room, one bed, and she could not stand. He felt the change in her body. I am setting you down, he said. Then I will move away. He lowered her onto the mattress, supporting the broken leg until it rested on a folded quilt. The instant her weight settled, he stepped back. 3 full paces. Clara watched him. Nishi removed his hat, hung it on a peg, and turned to the hearth. He knelt in the ashes and began building a fire. He did not ask her to undress. He did not touch the wet blanket around her. He arranged pine shavings, twigs, and split wood with the care of a man repairing something that could not be rushed. The match flared in his hands. Sulfur sharpened the air. A small flame took hold, then another. Soon the first dry branch cracked, and smoke pulled upward through the chimney. Only when the fire had begun to warm the stones did Nishi face her again. You must remove the wet clothes. Clara's fingers closed on the blanket. He saw it. I will fill the kettle, he said. He turned his back and crossed to the hand pump. The iron handle squeaked with each stroke. Water splashed into the kettle loud enough to cover the sounds behind him. Clara worked quickly. Her coat peeled away with difficulty. The skirt was worse. It clung to her legs, heavy with mud, and dragged across the injured ankle. She pressed her fist to her mouth and pulled until the garment came free. She covered herself with the dry quilts from the chest. You may turn, she said. Nishi set the kettle on the stove and approached the foot of the bed. He kept his eyes on her boots. The left first, he said. He unlaced it and eased it away. Then he removed the wet sock and rubbed her foot with a dry cloth until pain returned to her toes. The right boot had swollen tight around the injury. Nishi drew the knife from his belt. Clara looked at the blade. That boot cost $6. It will cost more if I pull it. She shut her eyes. Cut it. He sliced the laces, opened the tongue, and peeled the leather away from the sides. Even then, the final movement sent a violent shock through her body. Clara arched against the mattress and caught the quilt in both fists. A tear slipped into her hair. Nish said nothing about it. He laid the boot aside and examined the ankle. The skin was darkening from red to purple. The joint had swollen nearly round. "I need straight wood, wool, and hot water," he said. "I will set it before the swelling grows worse." "Have you done this?" "Yes." "To a person?" "Yes." "Did they walk afterward?" "One did." Clara looked at him. "The other was kicked in the head by a mule," he added. "The ankle was not the difficulty." Spite herself, she gave a short, startled breath. Nishi brought 2 smooth cedar slats from the tack room. He softened strips of clean wool in hot water and laid everything within reach. Then he sat at the foot of the bed. "I must pull the heel and turn the foot." "How far?" "Far enough. Tell me before you do it." "I will." He wrapped one hand around her heel and the other above the ankle. His fingers were warm now from the kettle. Clara, she met his eyes now. The world narrowed to his hands and the terrible shift inside her leg. She cried out once. He held the position until the bones settled, then placed the cedar along either side and bound it firmly with wool. Clara lay shaking beneath the quilts. Nish checked the color of her toes. He pressed a fingernail until the skin whitened, then watched the blood return. "The binding is not too tight," he said. "The foot is straight." Clara stared at the ceiling beams. "I may be sick." He moved the basin beside the bed before she finished speaking. When the nausea passed, he gave her a cloth and turned away while she wiped her mouth. The kettle began to sing. Nishi crushed willow bark into a cup, poured hot water over it, and set it near the fire to steep. He added more wood, then hung her wet clothes over 2 chairs. The room filled with the smell of smoke, damp wool, and bitter tea. Clara watched him move. Nothing he did asked to be praised. Each action simply led to the next. Fire, water, splint, tea, dry cloth, more wood. "You found me quickly," she said. Nishi adjusted the boot he had placed near the hearth. The gelding returned before the storm reached the barn. "You could have believed I took the line shack. I looked there first. And then I followed the broken brush and the marks from the saddle. In that rain," he lifted one shoulder. "The earth still speaks when it is wet." Clara turned her face toward the fire. The pain softened at the edges after the tea. Exhaustion pressed on her, but one thought kept her awake. The bed occupied the warmest corner of the cabin. Her splinted leg lay across the middle. There was nowhere for Nishi to sleep without risking the injury. He cleaned mud from his rifle beside the hearth until the fire burned low and steady. Then he opened the blanket chest and removed a saddle blanket and a rolled canvas sheet. "You can sleep near the stove," Clara said. Nishi carried the bedding toward the tack room door. "It is warmer here." "I know. The tack room has no fire. The chimney wall passes through it. That wall is barely warm." He stopped with his hand on the latch. Clara pushed herself higher on the pillows. "There is room on the floor. You carried me through a storm. I will not have you freezing beside horse collars." Nishi looked back at her. Firelight moved over the planes of his face. "If I sleep in this room," he said, "you will not sleep." She opened her mouth. "You will listen each time I move. You will measure the distance, from the floor to the bed. You will wonder whether I am awake." Clara said nothing. He continued without accusation. "Your body has had enough to guard against tonight." He opened the tack room door. Cold air entered with the smell of oats and saddle soap. "If you need the fire tended, call my name. If the pain changes, call my name. I will hear." Then he stepped through and closed the door. Clara lay in the quiet. On the other side of the wall, canvas rustled. The old repair bench creaked beneath Nishi's weight. After that, there was only soft crackle of the fire, and the storm pressing uselessly against the logs. Her hands slowly unclenched. For the first time since she could remember, being alone in a room did not mean she had been left. She slept. Morning came bright enough to hurt. The storm had glazed the yard in ice. Through the frosted window, the corral fence shone as if each rail had been dipped in glass. Snow sagged from the pine branches, and somewhere beneath it a trapped limb snapped with a dull report. Clara woke to the smell of cornmeal browning in a pan. For several seconds she did not know where she was. Then her ankle throbbed beneath the splint, and the whole night returned. Nishi stood at the stove. He had changed into a dry shirt, though his hair was still damp at the ends. A pot of coffee sat near the coals. He turned the corn cake with the edge of a knife, moved the pan to the cooler side, and only then looked toward the bed. "How is the foot?" "Attached. That is useful." Clara glanced at him, uncertain whether he had made a joke. His face gave nothing away. A wagon sounded outside before she could decide. The wheels crushed the frozen ruts with slow, complaining cracks. Nishi set the pan aside and opened the door. Dr. Miller entered, carrying a leather case and a crust of snow across both shoulders. He stamped his boots, swore at the weather, and handed Nishi his hat. "I found your bay at the lower road yesterday," he said. "Saddle hanging like a dead thing from one strap. Vance's foreman saw him too. By breakfast, the whole settlement had Clara buried and you halfway to Mexico. Mr. Vance works quickly when land may become vacant," Clara said. Dr. Miller looked toward the bed. "Good. Sarcasm usually means the patient still has blood." He moved a chair to the foot of the mattress and opened his case. The metal clasps snapped sharply in the quiet room. Clara disliked the smell that rose from it. Carbolic acid, old bandages, spirits. Nishi pulled back the quilt only as far as the injured leg. He remained nearby, not looming but present. The doctor examined the cedar splints. His eyebrows lifted. "You set this?" he asked Nishi. "Yes." "With what?" Miller snorted. "I can see that." He loosened the wool wrapping. Clara fixed her gaze on a knot in the wall while his fingers pressed around the joint. The pain was deep and nauseating, but the ankle did not move. "Can you feel this? And this?" "Yes." "Any burning in the toes?" "No." He checked the pulse on the top of her foot, then sat back. "Well," he said, "I expected a mess. This is not a mess." Clara turned her head. "The break is clean. The alignment is better than half the plaster work I see in town. Keep the swelling down, keep the skin dry, and do not let her put weight on it." "How long?" Clara asked. "At least 6 weeks before you test it. More likely 8 before you ride. Longer if you behave like yourself." "What does that mean?" "It means you will decide that rules apply only to other people and attempt to cross the yard on the 3rd day. I have never been your patient before. I have met your kind." Dr. Miller rebound the splint, following Nishi's placement rather than changing it. He drew a small bottle of laudanum from his case, looked at Clara, then put it away. "Willow bark unless the pain becomes unmanageable," he said. "Laudanum makes some people sleep and some people foolish. You do not strike me as a woman who enjoys either condition." He closed his case. At the door he paused. "Vance has been asking whether the southern pasture remains under active use. That is not a medical concern, but it may become yours. Pendleton's circuit is due in late spring." Clara's hand tightened on the quilt. "How late?" 8 or 10 weeks. "Convenient." "For Vance, yes." Dr. Miller pulled on his gloves. "Heal anyway." After he left, the cabin seemed too small for Clara's thoughts. 6 weeks meant 42 days. 8 meant 56. The wheat needed grinding. The lower fence had to be checked after the storm. Tax receipts required sorting before the judge arrived. Vance would move cattle the moment he believed no one could patrol the ridge. Clara pushed the quilt aside. Nishi placed the breakfast plate on the table, then looked at her. "I can work from a chair," she said. "You can eat from the bed." "I did not say eat." "No, I need the ledger." He brought it without argument. That stopped her. He also brought the dented metal box from beneath a loose floorboard, the ink bottle, 2 sharpened pencils, the small ruler, and the mending awl. He placed a board across her lap and arranged the objects so she could reach them. "The wheat?" Clara asked. "I will grind it. The fences? I will ride them. The harness from the north stall has a split trace. You will mend it." She looked down at the awl resting against her palm. Nish pulled the damaged strap from a peg and laid it across the foot of the bed. "The tier is above the buckle. Move the stitch line 1/2 an inch. It was not comfort, it was work." Clara felt some tight inner cord loosen. "And the survey records?" she asked. "I will tell you where the old markers stood. You will put them where a judge can understand." He poured coffee into a cup, added a little water to cool it, and set it beside her. "The leg is broken," he said. "The partnership is not." Then he went outside to feed the stock. For 4 days the weather held them inside a ring of snow. Nishi moved between barn and cabin before dawn and after dark. He carried water in 2 iron buckets, split wood under the lean-to, cleared snow from the roof, and returned each time with ice in his hair and cold in the seams of his clothes. Clara worked from the bed until her back ached. She sorted receipts, repaired straps, and copied the property descriptions into clean columns. The days found a rhythm. In the morning, Nishi checked the swelling and warmed the pine salve near the stove. He loosened the bindings, applied a thin layer around the bruised flesh, and wrapped the ankle again. He always told her before touching the leg. When the pain sharpened, he asked questions about the accounts. How many fence staples remain? 11 pounds, perhaps 12. Perhaps? The last sack was weighed before the North Gate repair. Then the number is not known. Clara glared at him. You are enjoying this? No. His mouth shifted at one corner. At noon, she worked on leather. The awl made a satisfying pop each time it passed through an oiled strap. Nishi sat across the table, trimming frayed edges with his knife. They spoke only when necessary. Too close to the rot, he would say. Then the buckle will sit crooked. It can sit crooked and hold. It can sit straight and hold. He would slide the strap back to her without comment. At night, he slept in the tack room. Clara stopped arguing after the second evening. She noticed instead that he left the connecting door unlatched. If she called, he answered before the second word. On the fifth morning, the sky cleared and sunlight entered the cabin like a visitor who had forgotten the way. Clara insisted on moving to the table. She set a chair near the bed, placed a padded stool beneath it, and offered his forearm. He did not lift her until she asked. I can pivot, she said. I know. If you take all my weight, I will not learn the balance. The bone is not ready to teach you balance. She gave him a hard look, then gripped his arm. The short crossing cost more than she expected. Her left leg shook, her ribs pulled. Sweat gathered at her temples by the time she settled into the chair. Nishi placed the splinted leg on the stool and moved away. Clara waited for the pain to quiet, then opened the metal box. Its contents had never been properly ordered. Old tax notices lay among seed receipts, brands recorded on scraps of flour paper, and survey notes drawn in different hands. Nishi had kept everything, but not because he trusted paper. He kept it because men who controlled paper had used its absence against him. Clara flattened the first survey beside the ledger. Tell me where the northern line began before Vance moved the posts. Nishi took the opposite chair, at the split stone above the wash. How far from the spring? From the old spring or the new channel? Clara looked up. There are two? The flood changed it 3 years ago. Show me. He drew with one thick finger on the tabletop. The water used to turn east beneath the cottonwood. Now it cuts south. The survey follows the old bed. Clara found a tax map, compared it to the first deed, and wrote a note. What next? The line goes to 3 burned pines. 3-2 now. Lightning took the middle tree. When? The summer before Vance bought the western tract. That mattered. For hours, Nye gave her the land in memory. Stone shelves, dry channels, a leaning juniper, a scar in the canyon wall shaped like a hooked finger. Clara translated each feature into distances and angles. By evening, a pattern had appeared. Vance's newer claims depended on markers that had not existed when the original survey was made. His men had replaced the burned pine reference with a post farther east, then used the altered point to push the boundary inward. How many acres? Nishi asked. Clara calculated twice. 42 by the conservative line. Nearly 50 if he claims the spring bend. Nish sat back. That is why he wants it, he said. The winter grass. And water. Yes. Clara studied the figures. He believes the court will accept a clean document over your memory. It has before. There was no self-pity in his voice. That made the statement heavier. She looked across the table. It will not this time. Nish's gaze held hers for a moment. No. The certainty in his answer warmed her more than agreement should have. As the snow melted, life returned in small noises. Water dripped from the eaves. Hens scratched beneath the porch. The gelding that had thrown Clara stood in the corral with a healing cut along his flank and watched the cabin as if ashamed of nothing. Clara did not look at him for long. The ankle improved slowly. The bruising yellowed, then faded. The swelling receded enough that the lines of her foot returned. The pain changed from sharp heat to a deep, stubborn ache. The harder change occurred elsewhere. Nish began sleeping in the main room again after Clara woke one night and told him the tack room was unnecessary. You slept, he said. Yes, you may not if I stay. I will tell you if that becomes true. He studied her face, then laid his blanket near the hearth rather than beside the bed. The first night, Clara listened to his breathing. She hated that he had been right. She counted the seconds between his movements, measured the reach of his arm from the floor, and kept one hand beneath the pillow where a small knife rested. Nishi did not move toward her. The second night, she woke only twice. By the fourth, she slept until dawn. No conversation marked the change. In the 6th week, Dr. Miller returned. He removed the splint, pressed along the bone, and made Clara flex her toes. It has knitted, he said. That does not mean it is strong. When may I stand, with support? Briefly. If the pain is sharp, stop. When may I ride? When you can cross this room without trying to prove something. That is not a date. It is the best date you are getting. After he left, Nishi moved the table against the wall and cleared the floor. Clara sat in the high-backed chair with the bare foot resting on a folded blanket. Without the cedar splints, her ankle looked thin and uncertain. The calf above it had wasted during the weeks of stillness. "I thought it would look stronger," she said. "It has been hidden from work. It looks like someone else's leg. It will remember you." Nishi stood in front of her and offered both forearms. Clara placed her hands on them. "Do not lift me. I will not unless you fall." She pushed from the chair. Her left leg took most of the weight. The right foot touched the floor with no more pressure than a leaf. Even that sent stiffness up the calf. She drew back. Nishi did not tighten his grip. "Again," he said. "I felt it. That is why again." She lowered the heel. The floorboard was warm from the sun. She pressed until the ankle accepted a little of her weight. Fear rose faster than pain. Clara saw lightning, mud, a horse vanishing between trees, her hands clamped around Nishi's arms. "The bone is not breaking," he said. "You cannot know that. I can feel your weight. You are holding almost all of it away. I cannot. You are already standing." She looked down. Both feet were on the floor. Nishi stepped backward half a pace. Clara moved with him. Her right knee trembled violently. "One step," he said. She moved the injured foot forward the width of her hand. Then the left. The room seemed longer than the entire southern ridge. By the time they reached the stove, her breath came in short bursts and the ankle burned. Nish turned them carefully. "We are done. The chair is across the room. I can carry you." "No." He waited. Clara crossed back under her own strength, leaning heavily on him but placing each foot deliberately. When she sat, she was shaking from effort. Nishi knelt and wrapped the ankle in warm cloth. "I walked," she said. "You did. I thought I would fall." "You did not. You would have caught me." "Yes." She watched his hands tie the cloth. "That is not the same as not falling." "No," he said. "It is not." 2 weeks later, Clara could cross the yard with a cedar cane. Her limp remained, but it no longer ruled every step. By then, the snow had retreated to the shadowed sides of the mountains. The pasture softened under spring rain. Fence posts leaned where the ground had heaved. Vance cattle appeared twice near the creek and vanished before Nishi reached them. The judge's arrival was less than a month away. One afternoon, Nish led an old gray mare from the corral. She was broad through the chest, white around the muzzle, and patient enough to stand while a hen pecked near her hoof. Clara stopped on the porch. "No." Nish tied the mare to the rail and began brushing dried mud from her shoulder. "I did not ask. You brought a saddled horse to the house." "I brought a horse. The saddle is visible." "Yes." Clara's palm had gone damp around the cane. The smell of warm hide and leather pulled the storm back into her body. Her ankle tightened as if the bone remembered before she did. Nishi continued brushing. "The wagon road to town is worse than the trail. The judge will not wait because you fear a saddle." "I do not fear the saddle." He looked at her. Clara exhaled. "I fear the moment when it stops holding." Nishi set the brush aside. "Then today you will learn whether this one holds." He checked every strap in front of her. He ran his hand beneath the cinch, pulled the billets, tested the stirrup leathers, and made her inspect the stitching herself. "The thread is sound," Clara admitted. "The leather, oiled, no cracks. The mare old." The mare turned one ear toward her. "Experienced," Nishi said. Clara approached slowly. The animal's breath stirred the front of her skirt. Up close, she saw pale scars across the mare's chest and a notch missing from one ear. Nish held out his hands. "May I lift you?" Clara looked toward the ridge. Beyond it lay the land records, the judge, Vance, and every person who expected injury to make her disappear. "Yes." Nish placed his hands at her waist and raised her without jarring the ankle. He settled her into the saddle and stepped away. He left her right foot free of the stirrup. The mare stood. Clara gripped the horn until her fingers hurt. "Do not hold the leather as if you mean to kill it," Nish said. "I am confirming its existence. It exists." He took the lead rope and walked one slow circle around the yard. The mare followed with a rolling, even gait. Clara's body remembered the motion. At first it remembered terror. Then it remembered balance. By the third circle, she loosened one hand. By the fifth, Nishi stopped leading. Clara sat breathing in the smell of dust and horse sweat. The mare's ears moved lazily. Nothing tore, nothing struck. The earth remained where it belonged. "I can ride to the ridge," Clara said. "Not today." "I can." "You can ride the yard today." "The ridge tomorrow," she almost argued. Then hoofbeats rose from the southern trail. Not one horse. 4. Nishi turned before the riders appeared. He placed one hand on the mare's bridle. steadying her, though the old animal had barely lifted her head. Clara looked toward the dust climbing above the sage. Silas Vance reached the yard in a fine black coat and polished boots unsuited to mud. 3 men followed, their horses were lathered from being pushed too hard uphill. Vance halted outside the gate. His gaze traveled from Clara's face to the cane leaning against the porch, then to the saddle beneath her. "Well," he said, "the dead have become industrious." Clara's fear changed shape. It cooled. "Disappointed?" she asked. Vance smiled with only his mouth. "Surprised. The story in town has you crippled. The story in town does not keep accurate books." One of his men laughed before remembering who paid him. Vance's expression tightened. He drew a leather folder from his saddlebag and held it against his thigh. "I came as a courtesy. The territorial office has corrected the southern boundary. The pasture and spring now fall under my western tract." Nishi did not move. "No," Vance tapped the folder. "This says otherwise." "Paper has said many things about land it has never seen," Nishi replied. Vance ignored him and addressed Clara. "You understand documents. That is why I thought you might persuade your husband to be sensible. Your injury has made the homestead vulnerable. I am willing to buy the cabin, the cattle, and the remaining claim. Cash. Enough for you both to leave without humiliation." Clara looked at the folder. "Show me." He hesitated, then removed a cream-colored patent and held it out from horseback. Nash stepped between them before Vance could lean closer. Clara slid from the mare only after Nishi lifted her down and gave her the cane. She stood beside him, not behind him. Vance extended the document again. Clara did not take it. She read what she could from where she stood. Registry date, meridian shift, clerk's signature. The seal looked convincing. The coordinates did not. 30 degrees west from the burned pines? She asked. That is the official correction. That line crosses the canyon face. Vance's horse tossed its head as he jerked the reins. It joins my deed at the northern shelf. No. It rises 400 feet through granite. You have been confined to a bed for 2 months. Your memory may not be dependable. Clara planted the cane more firmly. My memory did not break. For the first time, anger showed cleanly on Vance's face. He shifted his horse forward. The animal's chest came close to the gate. Nishi stepped into its path. He carried no rifle. He did not raise his hands. He simply stood. The thoroughbred balked and danced sideways. Vance drove in his spurs, but the horse refused to advance toward the still figure in front of it. The paper is false, Nishi said. His voice was low enough that everyone leaned to hear it. The markers remain. The spring remains. We remain. Vance dragged the horse under control. Judge Pendleton will take a territorial patent over an Apache's story and a woman's figures. Clara met his gaze. Then bring the patent. I intend to. So do we. Vance shoved the document back into its folder. When the judge rules, the sheriff will remove you. Nishi opened the gate. For one instant, Vance seemed to think it was an invitation to enter. Then Nishi said, "The road is behind you." The hired men looked away. Vance turned his horse so sharply that its hindquarters struck the fence. He rode downhill in a cloud of dust, the others following. Clara watched until the last rider disappeared. Only then did she feel the weakness in her healing leg. Nishi took the cane before it slipped and placed his forearm beneath her hand. "You saw the date?" he asked. "Yes." "The signature?" "Yes." "And the line?" "Yes." He looked toward the cabin. Clara's pulse had steadied. The fear of the horse, the ache in her ankle, and the insult in Vance's voice had all narrowed into a single clean purpose. "Put water on for coffee," she said. "We have a forgery to take apart." They worked after dark. Nishi lit the kerosene lamp and closed the shutters against the cold. Clara spread the old surveys across the table, weighting their curling corners with a coffee cup, the mending awl, and a smooth river stone. The patent itself was not in their hands, but she had seen enough. "Repeat the date," she said. "The 12th day of March, year." "Yes." "And the clerk's name was Asabel?" Nishi nodded. The loops were large. The first letter crossed the line below. Clara pulled tax notices from the metal box until she found one signed 3 years earlier. Asabel's hand slanted sharply to the right. The capital A formed like a narrow roof. She remembered Vance's paper, the same name imitated with decorative loops by someone who thought flourish could replace familiarity. She searched deeper in the box and found a folded notice from the territorial office. The paper had browned along the creases. Nishi read the date over her shoulder. 2 years ago. Clara unfolded it fully. It concerned unpaid filing fees, but the final paragraph was what mattered. All future correspondence was to be directed to Bell's successor following the clerk's death from fever. She laid the notice flat. He used a dead man's signature. Nishi poured coffee into both cups. Perhaps Vance did not know. He did not need to know. He only needed someone in the office willing to copy a name. Will the judge care who made it? He will care that it cannot be lawful. Clara drew a clean grid on a fresh page. She marked the split boulder, the old creek bed, the burned pines, and the canyon shelf. Then she set the compass point and traced the 30-degree shift Vance had claimed. The line climbed through the northern wall and ended in empty space beyond the ridge. Nishi leaned closer. It does not touch his western deed. No, it misses by nearly a quarter mile. Then why choose that number? Because whoever drafted it worked from an old township map. On paper, the canyon is a contour mark. From a desk in town, it looks like a slope, but it is a wall. Exactly. She sharpened the pencil with a small knife and calculated the acreage. The answer matched what she had estimated weeks earlier. Enough grass to winter a large herd, plus access to the spring. Vance had not selected the land carelessly. He had selected it greedily and described it badly. The lamp burned lower. Nishi added oil and trimmed the blackened edge of the wick. Clara copied the clerk's death notice into the ledger, then placed the original inside a waxed envelope. What else? He asked. Receipts for the fence wire, tax payments showing continuous use, your brand records. Dr. Miller's statement that the injury did not prevent the household from working the claim. He may not come to court. He does not need to. His bill is dated. It proves he visited the occupied homestead. Nishi considered that and brought the medical receipt from the shelf. Clara smiled faintly. You keep everything. I keep what men later say never existed. The answer quieted her. She arranged the evidence in order: original survey, tax notices, wire receipts, brand book, doctor's bill, clerk's death notice, her corrected map. Each item supported the next. No single paper had to carry the whole truth. Outside, the wind rubbed dry branches against the roof. Inside, coffee cooled in tin cups. Nishi sat across from her, his forearms resting on the table, listening as she explained how the argument must unfold. Vance will speak first, Clara said. He likes an audience. He will describe us as unable to improve the land. He will make my ankle the center of his case because weakness is the only language he understands. Nichi's face went still. Let him, she continued. The more certain he sounds, the less room he leaves himself when the figures fail. He may insult you. He already has. He may insult me. He certainly will. Nishi looked at the flame in the lamp. I can remain silent. Clara knew what the statement cost him. Silence in that courtroom would not mean submission. It would mean allowing men who had ignored him to speak falsely while he trusted her to answer. I will not let them erase you, she said. His eyes lifted to hers. And I will not let them make you stand alone, he replied. For a moment neither moved. Clara became aware of the small things, the seam she had repaired at his cuff, a faint scar across his thumb, the warmth of the lamp between them. She had lived with him for months and still knew little of his life before the cabin. Yet she knew how he stacked wood, how he checked a frightened horse, how he stepped away when she needed space. These seemed more reliable than history told for effect. She closed the ledger. We leave at first light. Nish rose and brought the old gray mare's saddle inside. He placed it near the stove, where the leather would remain supple through the cold night. Together they checked the cinch. Clara ran every inch of it through her hands, bending the strap, inspecting the holes, testing each stitch. No weakness, she said. Nishi handed her a second strap. This will run beneath the first. A double cinch for the road down. You do not trust the leather. I trust what I inspect. Then I prepare for what inspection misses. Clara looked at him and understood that this was how he had approached her from the beginning. Not as fragile, not as dangerous, as someone whose wounds could be respected without being allowed to decide everything. She folded the maps into the canvas satchel. Nishi wrapped the metal box in oilcloth and tied it behind his saddle. Before banking the fire, he placed her cane beside the door. That night, he spread his blanket near the hearth. Clara lay awake only a little while. Just before sleep, she heard him turn on the floor. Nish? Yes. If I cannot mount in the morning, you will. That is not what I asked. He was quiet for a moment. If you cannot, we will wait until you can. The judge will not wait. Then I will carry you into his hall as I carried you off the ridge. Clara stared into the darkness. No, she said softly. Tomorrow I walk. Nishi did not challenge her. Tomorrow, he answered, I walk beside you. The old gray mare stood still while Clara mounted. Dawn had barely touched the eastern peaks. Frost silvered the fence rails, and the yard smelled of cold ash, leather, and the oats Nishi had scattered in the feed trough. Clara wore her dark riding skirt, a white blouse buttoned high at the throat, and the heaviest coat she owned. The canvas satchel crossed her chest. Her cedar cane was tied behind the saddle where she could reach it. Nishi checked both cinches once more. "You have already checked them," Clara said. "I am checking what changed while we slept. Leather does not make decisions in the night. Cold does." He pulled the second strap tight, then ran 2 fingers beneath it. Clara looked down the mountain road. 10 miles of ruts, shale, and switchbacks separated them from the settlement. Her right ankle had begun to ache before they left the yard. Nishi mounted the roan gelding and brought him beside her. "You set the pace," he said. "If I set it, we may arrive after dark. Then the judge will hear us tomorrow." Clara gathered the reins. "No, he hears us today." They rode. The first mile passed in near silence. The mare chose her footing with patient care, stepping around loose stones rather than over them. Clara kept her right heel light in the stirrup and let the stronger leg take more weight. Each jolt traveled up the healing joint, but none felt sharp. At the place where the trail left the open pasture and entered the pines, she smelled wet bark. The storm returned without warning. Not the weather itself, the memory. Her hands locked on the reins. The mare felt the change and slowed. Clara saw the flash of lightning against dead wood, felt the saddle turning beneath her, heard bone break inside her own body. Nish brought the roan alongside, but did not reach for her bridle. "What is here?" he asked. "The tree line. What else?" Clara looked around. 2 ravens. Snow beneath the north stones. A dead branch caught in the juniper. The horse, standing, the leather, holding. The sky, clear. Nishi waited. Clara loosened her fingers one at a time. The mare breathed out and resumed walking. They passed the shelf where Nishi had found her. Clara did not look directly at the rock overhang, but she knew its shape. Water still darkened the stone beneath it. "I thought you would wait at the cabin," she said. Nishi kept his gaze on the road. "I know. I thought that was sensible. It might have been. Then why did you come?" He considered the question long enough that she thought he might leave it unanswered. "Because you were late," he said. "That is all?" "No." The roan stepped over a shallow channel. Nishi shifted with the motion. "You had counted the southern posts for 3 mornings," he continued. "You spoke of Vance moving them before you slept. A person who works that hard to remain somewhere does not disappear willingly." Clara looked ahead. He had understood her before she had understood him. The lower road softened beneath the morning sun. Patches of mud pulled at the horses' hooves. Near the first homestead, a woman hanging wash stopped with a sheet in her hands and watched them pass. Farther on, 2 boys ran beside the fence until their mother called them back. The settlement appeared around a bend in the river, one long street, a church with an unfinished steeple, a blacksmith shed, the mercantile, the hotel, and the municipal hall built of sun-bleached boards. Wagons crowded the hitching rail. Pendleton's circuit always drew claimants, debtors, witnesses, and men who simply enjoyed watching other people lose things. Clara smelled coal smoke, manure, frying salt pork, and stale beer before they reached the first building. Heads turned. Some people recognized Nishi. Most recognized Clara's limp when he helped her dismount. She refused his arm after her boots touched the ground. "I have the cane. You also have 10 miles in the ankle, and 20 yards to the door." Nish untied the cane and handed it to her. He remained half a pace behind as she crossed the street. The municipal hall was already crowded. Men filled the benches and stood against the walls. Women occupied the rear near the stove, though the room was warm enough without it. Dust hung in the shafts of light from the high windows. Someone had spilled tobacco juice near the door. At the front, Judge Pendleton sat behind a heavy oak table, wire spectacles low on his nose. He was smaller than Clara remembered, but the room arranged itself around his attention. A clerk sat to one side with a stack of forms. The sheriff leaned near the opposite wall. Silas Vance stood before the judge in a charcoal coat, his boots shone. He had brought a lawyer from Prescott, a narrow man with pale hands and a voice trained to fill rooms. Vance saw Clara enter. For the length of a breath, surprise stripped his face clean. Then he smiled. The lawyer followed his gaze. "Mrs. Sozy," he said loudly enough for the room to hear. "We had been informed your health prevented attendance." "My health prevented fencing in February," Clara replied. "It did not prevent reading." A few people near the rear laughed. Judge Pendleton raised one finger, and the room quieted. "Bring the relevant materials forward," he said. Clara moved down the aisle. The cane struck the pine floor in a slow rhythm. Tap, step, tap, step. Her ankle burned by the time she reached the front, but her hands remained steady. Nishi stopped 3 paces behind her. The lawyer glanced at him. "Will the defendant be represented by counsel?" Clara set the canvas satchel on the table. "The defendant will represent the facts." The judge looked over his spectacles. "That is not what he asked." "No, Your Honor, we have no attorney. Then I will permit plain speech and no theater." "Mr. Hale, that instruction applies especially to you." The lawyer's mouth tightened. "Of course." Vance presented his claim first. He spoke of order, improvement, and economic necessity. He described the southern pasture as unused land trapped between confused surveys. He said his cattle operation employed 12 men and supplied beef to 3 settlements. He called the boundary correction a service to the territory. When he spoke of Clara and Nishi, his language changed. He did not call Nishi the registered claimant. He called him the Apache occupant. He referred to Clara's injury 3 times. He said the homestead lacked the labor required by federal law. He suggested the marriage had been arranged only to exploit a filing technicality. Clara listened without interrupting. Nishi did not move. The lawyer placed the cream-colored patent before the judge. It bore a pressed seal, a registry date from March, and the name Asabel in elaborate ink. "This instrument corrects the meridian by 30 degrees west," Hale said. "It joins the disputed tract to Mr. Vance's deed and recognizes his continuous investment in roads, fencing, and water access." Judge Pendleton examined the seal, and the current occupants? Their filing is rendered defective by the corrected survey. Moreover, their inability to maintain active improvements demonstrates abandonment in practice, if not yet in form. Vance turned slightly so the room could see his concern. "No one takes pleasure in removing an injured woman from a failing ranch," he said. "I offered fair compensation." Clara opened the satchel. Judge Pendleton looked at her. "Mrs. Sozy?" She placed the original township survey on the table, then the tax maps, receipts, and ledger. "I will begin with the 30 degrees, she said. Her voice did not fill the room the way Hale's did. It did not need to. The people nearest leaned forward, and those behind them went quiet to hear. Clara turned her hand-drawn map toward the judge. "The patent claims a correction beginning at the 2 burned pines above the old creek bed. From that point, a line shifted 30 degrees west does not meet Mr. Vance's property." She laid a wooden ruler across the page. "It passes through the North Canyon wall, rises approximately 400 feet through vertical granite, and exits the township above the ridge." The judge looked from her map to the patent. Hale stepped closer. "A minor drafting error does not invalidate administrative intent." "The difference is not minor," Clara said. "The line misses Mr. Vance's tract by more than 1,200 feet. That may be corrected." "Then the paper before the court is not the correction." A murmur moved through the benches. Clara opened the original survey. "The federal grid uses the old creek channel as a reference. The channel moved after the flood 3 years ago. Mr. Vance's document uses the new channel but keeps the old measurements. Whoever drafted it never stood on the land." Hale lifted his chin. "Speculation." Nishi spoke for the first time. "The old bed is dry beneath the cottonwood. The new water cuts south of it." The lawyer turned. "And we are to accept your recollection?" "No," Clara said. You are to accept the tax assessor's map from the year before the flood, the road survey from the year after, and the receipts for replacement fence wire along the changed bank." She placed each paper on the table. The judge compared them in silence. Clara continued. "The Vance patent also refers to 3 burned pines. Only 2 remain. The middle tree was destroyed before Mr. Vance purchased his western tract. A legitimate new survey would describe the remaining pair or replace the landmark. This paper copies language from the original filing while pretending to record a new inspection." Vance shifted beside his lawyer. Hale said, "Even if the description contains inherited language, the clerk's certification carries legal authority." Clara looked at him. "Yes, let us discuss the clerk." She removed the yellowed notice from its waxed envelope. "Asabel is named as the signing territorial clerk." "That is plainly visible," Hale said. "This notice was issued by the same office 2 years ago. It directs all future filings to Bell's successor following his death from lung fever." The room went still. Clara handed the notice to the judge. Pendleton read it once, then again. Hale's pale hands closed around the edge of the table. There may have been another clerk of that name. There was not, Clara said. The registry lists one Asa Bell for this district. His earlier signature appears on our tax notice from 3 years ago. She laid the old tax paper beside the patent. The genuine hand slants right. The capital A is narrow. The patent signature is upright, looped and written with a different nib. It is an imitation by a person who knew the name and not the man. Judge Pendleton removed his spectacles and wiped them slowly. Vance spoke before his lawyer could stop him. I purchased that patent through recognized channels. Clara turned to him. From whom? That is irrelevant. It is the only relevant question left. I paid filing fees to an agent authorized to conduct territorial business. Name him. Vance's face reddened. I will not submit my commercial arrangements to interrogation. By the judge struck the table with his gavel. The crack silenced the room. You will answer, Pendleton said. Vance looked at Hale. The lawyer's voice had lost some of its reach. My client dealt with Mr. Luther Crane, a private land facilitator. The sheriff near the wall straightened. Judge Pendleton looked toward him. Crane? The sheriff nodded once. Wanted in Pima County for fraudulent mineral deeds. A different murmur passed through the room now, less uncertain and more eager. Vance's control began to fray. I had no knowledge of that. Clara believed him. The realization did not excuse him, but it sharpened the shape of what he had done. Vance had wanted the land badly enough to purchase certainty from a criminal and ask no questions. He had built his innocence out of deliberate ignorance. Judge Pendleton replaced his spectacles. Mrs. Sozy, you also claim continuous use despite your injury. Yes, explain. Clara opened the ledger to the winter pages. Our livestock remained fed and sheltered. The northern harness was repaired during the freeze. Wheat was ground. Fence damage was documented and corrected when the snow cleared. Tax payments are current. Brand records show 2 calves born in March. The homestead did not stop because I broke an ankle. Hale said, the law requires active improvement, not domestic bookkeeping. Clara slid the repaired trace receipt forward. The law recognizes household labor. It does not say a claimant must perform every task with the same limb. A woman near the rear said, that is right, before someone hushed her. Clara rested one hand on the ledger. My husband patrolled the property, maintained the stock, cleared storm damage, and restored the fences. I repaired equipment, ordered supplies, reconstructed the survey, and prepared the tax filings. We divided the work. That is not abandonment. It is a working homestead. Hale turned toward Nishi. Mr. Sozy, do you understand the filing conditions you claim to have fulfilled? Nishi met his gaze. I understand fences that stand, cattle that live through winter, taxes that are paid, and water that remains where the survey placed it. The lawyer gave a thin smile. That was not my question. It was my answer. Laughter broke across the back bench. Judge Pendleton allowed it for 1 second before lifting the gavel. Vance stepped forward. This is sentiment. The court is being distracted by a dramatic injury and a collection of household scraps. Clara looked at him. No, she said. You expected sentiment because you brought a story about weakness. I brought measurements. She placed the final sheet before the judge, a clean summary of acreage under each possible line. Under the original survey, our claim contains the pasture, spring, and accessible fence route. Under Mr. Vance's stated correction, his own western deed remains separate, while the new boundary enters impassable rock. Under the line his cattle have actually followed, he gains 47 acres and sole access to spring water. His conduct matches the theft, not the patent. The judge studied the figures. Minutes passed. The room grew hot. Clara's ankle throbbed in time with her pulse. She shifted her weight slightly on the cane. Nishi noticed, but did not move toward her. At last Pendleton folded the patent in half. Then he folded it again. This document is invalid, he said. Vance inhaled sharply. The signature is fraudulent. The survey language is internally contradictory. The coordinates fail to join the claimed tract. I find no evidence of abandonment by the Sozy household and substantial evidence of continuous use. He looked toward the clerk. Record the original boundary as controlling. Attach Mrs. Sozy's corrected map and supporting receipts to the district file. The clerk dipped his pen. Judge Pendleton turned to Vance. Your reliance on a known land swindler may be stupidity rather than conspiracy. I will allow the county attorney to determine which. What is clear is that you used this paper to threaten removal and to push cattle across a registered line. Vance's lips parted, but no sound came. If you, your employees, or your stock cross that line again, Pendleton continued, I will issue a federal trespass warrant. The sheriff will also forward your transaction with Luther Crane to Pima County. Hale gathered his papers with careful speed. Vance stared at Clara. The hatred in his face had lost its confidence. Without the patent, he looked less like a ruler, and more like a frightened man wearing expensive cloth. You have made an enemy, he said quietly. Clara closed the ledger. No, she replied. You made one when you moved the first post. The gavel struck again. Mr. Vance, the judge said, leave my courtroom. The sheriff opened the side gate. Vance turned. The crowd parted not out of respect but to avoid being touched by his humiliation. He walked the aisle alone. His lawyer followed several steps behind. The doors shut after them. For a few seconds no one spoke. Then the room released a collective breath. Clara gathered the papers in the order she had placed them. Her fingers trembled only once. While folding the clerk's death notice, she slid it into the envelope and tied the satchel. Judge Pendleton signed the ruling. Mrs. Sozy, he said without looking up, your map is better than the one in my district book. The one in your district book is wrong. So I have discovered. He sanded the wet ink. See that my clerk receives a duplicate. I will. Pendleton glanced toward Nishi. Mr. Sozy. Nishi inclined his head. The court recognizes your claim. The earth recognized it before the court, Nishi said. Clara felt half the room tense. Judge Pendleton's mouth twitched. Fortunately for you, the earth does not keep archives. No, Nish replied. It keeps scars. The judge considered that, then returned to his papers. Outside, sunlight filled the street. Clara stepped down from the boardwalk and nearly lost her balance when her tired ankle failed to take the change in height. Nishi's hand closed around her forearm before she fell. He released her the moment she steadied. You waited, she said. You were not falling until you were. She looked across the street. Vance was already gone. His hired men had left separately, unwilling to share the road with him. People came out of the hall behind them. A farmer Clara knew only as Mr. Dobbs touched the brim of his hat. My lower boundary uses that same creek map, he said. Might ask you to look at it sometime. A woman from the rear bench stepped forward. You said household labor counts. It does. My husband's brother says the farm is his because I cannot plow. Bring your tax receipts and the probate notice to the cabin next Thursday. Nish looked at Clara. She raised one eyebrow. What? Nothing. You are thinking something. I am thinking the table may become crowded. It is a large table. They ate at the hotel kitchen before starting home. Clara had coffee, beans, and a biscuit hard enough to tap against the plate. Nish ordered stew. Neither spoke much. Victory had not produced the feeling Clara expected. There was relief, yes, but also a hollow space where weeks of preparation had been. Her body remained braced for the next demand. At the hitching rail, Nishi checked the mare's saddle. Clara watched the strap pass through his hands. It held, she said. It did. You still inspect it? Yes. She touched the satchel at her side. The ruling is in the clerk's book. Yes. The boundary is safe. Yes. Then why do I feel as if something is about to happen? Nishi looked toward the mountains. Afternoon clouds gathered over the high ridge, harmless and white. Because something happened for a long time, he said. The body does not read court orders. Clara followed his gaze. The road home waited in full sun. The ride back took longer. Clara's ankle had stiffened during the hearing. By the time they reached the first switchback, each downward step of the mare drove a dull pressure through the joint. She said nothing. Nishi noticed anyway. At a level stretch beside the river, he dismounted and adjusted the right stirrup so Clara's foot could rest higher. I can manage it, she said. I know. Then stop treating me as if I cannot. Nishi looked up at her from beside the mare. He did not appear offended. I am treating the leather, he said. It was pulling your leg. Clara glanced down. The shorter strap did ease the strain. Oh, he remounted. After a mile she said, thank you. Nishi nodded as if the words were an entry placed in the proper column. They reached the tree line near sunset. The air smelled of warm pine and thawing soil. Birds moved in the brush. The rock shelf where Clara had waited to die appeared through the trunks. The mare slowed without being asked. Clara's heart began to strike hard. She felt the phantom drag of wet wool against her legs and the old helplessness of trying to move a shattered ankle through mud. Nishi halted beside her. We can pass without stopping, he said. Clara looked at the overhang. For months, she had remembered it as a mouth in the mountain, dark and cold. In the evening light, it was smaller than she had imagined. A fox had left prints in the damp earth beneath it. New grass grew where her hands had torn the mud. No, she said. I want to see it. She dismounted with Nishi's help and took the cane. The ground was soft but not slick. She crossed the distance slowly. Near the rock, she found a strip of leather half buried in the soil, the broken cinch. Mud had dried into the grain. One end was frayed where the fibers had torn. Clara bent with difficulty and picked it up. Nish remained several steps away. The strap was weak, she said. Yes, I checked it that morning. You checked what the eye could see. I should have replaced it, yes. The agreement struck her. You could tell me it was not my fault. It was not punishment, Nish said. It was worn leather, a frightened horse, lightning, and bad ground. Some of those things were yours to prevent. Some were not. Clara rubbed the torn fibers between her fingers. That is not very comforting. No, it is true. Yes, she almost smiled. For years people had offered her two kinds of explanation. Cruel men said every hurt was deserved. Kind men said none of it had anything to do with her choices. Nish gave her neither lie. He allowed responsibility without shame and chance without meaning. Clara folded the cinch and tucked it into the satchel beside the court ruling. What will you do with it? Keep it. Why? So I remember to replace the next one before it asks. They rode the last miles in deepening blue light. At the cabin, Nish lifted Clara down. Her legs nearly failed when they touched the ground. He caught her around the waist, steadying her against his chest. For one moment they stood too close. Clara felt his breath near her temple. His hands remained firm and still, not drawing her nearer. The old impulse to retreat rose, but it was quieter than before. I have my balance, she said. Nishi released her. Inside, the cabin smelled stale after a day shut tight. Clara opened the shutters while Nishi fed the stove. She placed the judge's ruling in the metal box, then slid the box beneath the floorboard. The action should have ended something. Instead, she checked the latch twice. She examined the window peg, counted the cartridges above the mantel, confirmed the back door was barred. When Nishi carried water from the pump, she watched the doorway until he returned. He said nothing. At supper, a spoon slipped from the edge of the pot and struck the floor. Clara jerked so hard her chair scraped backward. Nishi bent, picked up the spoon, wiped it, and set it beside the basin. It was iron, he said. I know what it was. Yes, she could not eat after that. The legal danger had passed, but her body had not received the message. For weeks, every thought had been directed toward Vance's patent. Now that the paper was gone, fear moved into the empty places. She slept badly. Some nights she woke certain she had heard riders near the fence. Some mornings, she found herself counting flour sacks before she was fully awake. She avoided the corral unless work required it. The old gray mare could carry her to town, but Clara did not touch the animal once they returned. Nishi watched without pressing. He also stopped checking the mare's saddle where Clara could see him. That irritated her. 3 days after the hearing, she found him in the barn oiling a new cinch. Why are you hiding that? She asked. Nishi continued working the oil into the leather. I am in the barn. You used to work at the table. The smell is strong. The cabin has smelled of leather for months. Yes. Clara leaned on the doorframe. You think the strap will upset me. I think you are tired. That is not the same thing. No. Then say what you mean. Nishi set the cinch across his knees. I think you used your mind to carry your body through the court. Now the mind has put the body down, and the body is shaking. Clara's face went hot. I am not shaking. Nish looked at her right hand. The fingers trembled around the cane. She tightened them. What do you suggest? She asked. Nothing today. That is not useful. She turned to leave. Nishi spoke before she reached the yard. The mare needs brushing. Clara stopped. I said not today, he added. Tomorrow, perhaps. The next afternoon, the gray mare stood outside the porch wearing only a rope halter. No saddle. Nishi held a worn grooming brush in one hand. He had chosen a quiet hour after the cattle had settled and before the wind usually rose. The yard was warm. Dust floated in the light. Clara sat on the porch step with the cane across her knees. I did not agree to this, she said. No, then why bring her? She sheds against the fence and breaks rails. That is a poor argument. It is still true. The mare lowered her head and pulled at a tuft of dry grass. Nishi brushed her shoulder, dust lifted in soft clouds. Clara watched the bristles pass through the coat. The sound was steady, rough, and quiet. After several minutes, Nish held the brush toward her. Clara did not take it. What do you want me to prove? She asked. Nothing. That I am not afraid? You are afraid. The plainness of it left her no room to defend herself. Nish rested the brush on his open palm. You rode because the land required it. You stood in court because the claim required it. Neither act taught your body that the horse is not the storm. Clara looked at the mare. The horse was part of the storm. One horse, one day. The saddle failed. There is no saddle. She stood carefully. The mare's head rose. Clara froze. Nishi let the lead rope hang slack. Look at her feet. Clara did. All four hooves remained planted, her ears. One ear pointed toward Clara, the other turned toward the barn. Her breath, slow, deep, untroubled. Clara stepped off the porch. The mare smelled of dust, sun-warmed hide, and hay. The scent tightened Clara's chest, but the yard remained bright. No thunder, no sleet. The ground beneath her boots was hard. She took the brush. The wooden back was smooth where years of hands had worn it. Nishi stepped away. Clara raised the brush and touched the mare's shoulder. The animal's skin twitched beneath the bristles. Clara jerked back. The mare continued chewing. It moved, Clara said. Flies also move her skin. Clara pressed the brush down again and drew it through the coat. Dust rose. She repeated the stroke. The work gave her something measurable. Shoulder to barrel, top to bottom, 5 strokes before clearing the brush. She counted without meaning to. At 20, the tightness in her throat eased. At 40, the mare leaned into the pressure. Clara moved closer. A knot in the mane resisted the bristles. She separated it with her fingers, working burrs from the hair one at a time. The mare lowered her head until her muzzle rested near Clara's hip. Clara stopped breathing. Warm air moved against her skirt. Nishi remained by the fence. She is asking whether you will continue, he said. How do you know? She could move away. Clara placed her palm against the mare's neck. Beneath the hide, the pulse was slow and heavy. The animal did not ask Clara to be fearless. It asked only that her hand remain where it was. She resumed brushing. When they finished, a blanket of gray winter hair lay across the yard. Clara's shoulder ached. Sweat dampened the back of her blouse. She has more dust than horse, Clara said. Less now. Nishi took the brush. Clara looked at the clean curve of the mare's neck. Bring her tomorrow. He nodded. For a week, that was all they did. Clara brushed the mare in the yard. She cleaned the hooves while Nishi held the rope. She learned the small differences between warning and habit. A lifted head, a tightened nostril, a hind foot resting rather than preparing to strike. She ran her hands along the animal's back and belly. She checked the skin where the cinch would lie. On the 8th day, Nishi placed a folded saddle blanket across the mare's back. Clara's breath caught. He did not add the saddle. They brushed around the blanket until it became another ordinary object. The next day, he laid the empty saddle over the rail and left it there. On the 10th, Clara lifted it with him. The leather was heavy. Her ankle complained as she shifted her weight, but she did not release her side. They set it on the mare. Nishi reached for the cinch. Wait, Clara said. He stopped. She ran her fingers beneath the strap, bent it back and inspected the stitching. The leather was new, dark with oil. No cracks, she said. No, the buckle tongue sits correctly. Yes. She fed the strap through the ring herself. When the saddle was secure, the mare stood in the yard for half an hour without a rider. Clara walked around her twice. She pushed the horn, pulled the cantle, checked both stirrup leathers. Nothing shifted. Nish untied the saddle and removed it. You are not asking me to mount? No. Why not? Because you asked the leather a question, it answered. That is enough for today. Clara found herself frustrated by his patience. It left every next step in her hands. That evening, rain began after sunset, not a storm, a soft spring rain that tapped the roof and darkened the yard. Clara sat at the table repairing a halter while Nish shaped a new handle for the garden hoe. The room smelled of damp earth through the open window. Tell me about the scar on your hand, Clara said. Nishi looked at the pale line crossing his knuckles. A rope, that is not a story. It is the part that remained. She waited. He turned the wood shaving with his knife. I was 19. A government wagon overturned in a wash. 2 mules were trapped. One kicked while I cut the harness. Did you save them? One. And the other? Broke its back. Clara pulled the waxed thread through the leather. You remember the one you did not save? Yes, more than the one you did. Sometimes. Rain ticked against the sill. Clara placed the halter flat. My father told people I married you because no white man would have me after he lost the boarding house. Nishi's knife stopped. He had promised me to a cattle buyer once, she continued. Not in writing. Men like him rarely put their worst bargains on paper. The buyer wanted the debt cleared and a wife who could keep accounts. I left before the wedding. How? I took $12 from the till. Nishi resumed shaving the wood. Was it yours? I had worked without wages for 9 years. Then you took a small payment. Clara looked at him. That is not how the law would call it. The law called Vance's paper a patent until this week. She lowered her eyes to hide the smile that came. I found work keeping books for a freight company, she said. When the company failed, I learned the land office would issue a claim to a married household more readily than to a woman alone. You needed someone who could read the filings. I needed a name the clerk could not dismiss. Nishi set the finished handle on the table. I know why we married. Do you regret it? The question left before she could retrieve it. Nishi did not answer quickly. Clara's pulse climbed. At last he said, I regret that necessity was the only door open to you. That is not what I asked. No. He set the knife down. I do not regret that you entered. The rain seemed louder. Clara looked at his hands on the table, both palms resting open against the wood. I thought you would consider me a tool, she said. I did, she stiffened. A useful one, he added. Sharp, difficult to hold incorrectly. Clara stared, then laughed. It surprised her enough that she covered her mouth. The sound had no bitterness in it. Nishi's expression changed, not into a smile exactly, but into something warmer. That is the worst kindness anyone has offered me, she said. It was not meant as kindness. I know. The moment settled between them without demand. The following morning, Clara asked to mount. Nishi saddled the mare in the corral. He checked the cinch, then stepped aside so Clara could check it again. She placed her left foot in the stirrup and tried to rise. The healing ankle protested when she pushed from the ground. She dropped back. Nishi held out his hands. May I? Clara nodded. He lifted at her waist while she pulled on the horn. For a second, her body hung between earth and saddle. Panic flared. Then she settled into the seat. The leather held. Nishi adjusted the right stirrup and placed her boot in it. No, wait until you choose. Clara gathered the reins. The mare shifted one hind foot. Clara's breath stopped. She is resting the other leg, Nishi said. I know. Knowing is not always feeling. No, he attached the lead rope and walked one slow circle. The mare moved beneath Clara with a broad, even sway. The corral fence passed to the right, then the barn, then the porch. At each turn, Clara expected the saddle to slip. It did not. Nishi walked a second circle. Let go of the horn, he said. I am holding the reins. You are also holding the horn with your soul. Clara looked down. Her left hand had indeed closed around it. She released one finger, then another. On the fourth circle, Nish unclipped the lead rope. The small metallic sound seemed enormous. Clara looked at him. You did not ask. You have the reins. That is not permission. No. He reached to reattach it. Clara stopped him. Leave it. Nishi stepped back. The mare waited. Clara pressed gently with her left calf and gave the slightest movement of the reins. The animal walked forward. She guided one circle alone, then another. On the third, her right foot settled more fully into the stirrup. The ankle accepted the pressure, not without pain but without collapse. Clara straightened. Nishi stood in the center of the corral, hands loose at his sides. The leather holds, she said. Yes, the horse listens. Yes, my leg hurts. Yes, she turned the mare toward the gate. Nishi moved to block it. Not the ridge, he said. I was going to the yard. You were looking at the ridge. I am allowed to look. Yes. She rode into the yard and stopped beside the porch. When Nishi helped her down, she kept one hand on his shoulder a moment longer than necessary. He did not move. Clara removed her hand. Tomorrow, she said. The lower trail. The ridge. The lower trail reaches the ridge later. She narrowed her eyes. Nishi's face remained solemn, but she knew now when he was amused. Very well, she said. The lower trail. The lower trail followed the creek through cottonwoods before climbing toward the first pasture. It was longer than the ridge path and far less steep. Clara resented it for the first half-mile. Then the mare stepped into shallow water. Sunlight broke across the current. Smooth stones shone beneath the surface. The horse lowered her head to drink, and Clara felt the pull through the reins without fear. She let the leather slide a little through her fingers. Nishi waited on the bank. You can let her choose, he said. I am aware. You are holding her mouth. Clara loosened the reins. The mare drank, lifted her head, and crossed. On the far side, the trail passed a field where spring grass had begun to cover the flood scars. Clara saw new fence posts Nishi had driven while she was confined. Each stood straight, the wire pulled evenly between them. You moved the line back, she said. To the survey. How many posts? 26. Cedar? Juniper on the lower section. Cedar near the wash. Juniper rot sooner. It was available. We will replace 6 before winter. Nishi nodded. Put it in the ledger. The phrase no longer sounded like an order or a defense. It sounded like a future. They rode for an hour and returned before the ankle grew hot. The next morning they went farther. On the third day, Clara asked for the ridge trail again. Nishi's the sky, the mare and clouds. No clouds, she said. I can see. The ground is dry. Yes. The cinch is new. Yes. You are searching for another objection. I am searching for whether you want the ridge or want to defeat it. Clara looked toward the dark line of pines. What is the difference? If you ride to defeat it, the storm still chooses the terms. She considered that. I want to see the pasture, she said. The upper grass will be coming in. Nishi mounted the roan. Then we go. The trail rose beneath them. At the tree line, Clara's pulse quickened. She named what she saw without being prompted. Lichen on stone, a squirrel crossing a branch, the shadow of a hawk. The mare's ears moved, but her pace remained steady. They passed the granite overhang. Clara did not stop this time. The path steepened near the wash. She shifted her weight forward, letting her knees and hips move with the horse. Her right ankle ached in the stirrup, but the pain belonged to the present. It was muscle and bone doing work. Nishi rode beside her, close enough to reach, far enough not to crowd. When they emerged from the pines, the high pasture opened under a clear blue sky. Spring had turned the grass deep green. Snowmelt gathered in shallow hollows, reflecting the light. The two burned pines stood at the eastern edge, black and unmistakable. Beyond them, the canyon wall rose in a sheer red-gray face. Clara laughed once when she saw it. Nish looked over. 30 degrees west, she said. 400 feet through granite. The cow would need wings. And a legal education. They rode to the split boulder and stopped. From there, the boundary could be read without paper. Old wire staples marked the first post. The dry creek bed traced the northern reach. The canyon wall made Vance's forgery absurd. Clara dismounted without being lifted. She lowered herself carefully, keeping the right foot light, and stood with one hand on the mare's shoulder. Nishi took a shovel from his saddle and walked to the nearest leaning marker. Together they reset it. He dug. Clara cleared stones with a short iron bar. When the post stood straight, he packed earth around the base while she checked the line by sight. 2 inches east, she said. Nishi pushed the post 1 inch back. He adjusted again. There, they worked until noon. Clara's hands blistered beneath her gloves. Her ankle swelled enough that she sat on the split boulder while Nishi boiled coffee in a blackened pot. He cut salt pork into a pan and warmed 2 pieces of cornbread over the coals. The food tasted of smoke and iron. Clara looked across the pasture. Mr. Dobbs will come Thursday with his creek map. I remember, and Mrs. Vale may bring probate papers. The table is large. She has 3 children, they may come. Nishi drank coffee. The floor is also large. Clara smiled into her cup. After eating, they walked to the spring. Vance's cattle had trampled the western bank during winter. The water remained clear where it rose from stone, but mud clouded the lower pool. We need a small fence around the source, Clara said. Not barbed wire, split rails. Leave an opening downstream for cattle. 40 rails. 32 if we use the rocks as the north side. Nishi studied the ground. 36. Why floodwater? Clara followed the line he indicated and saw where debris had scarred the bank. 36. She agreed. He looked at her with quiet satisfaction. What? You changed a number. I change numbers when facts require it. You defend them fiercely first. That is how I learn whether the facts are strong. They returned to the horses in afternoon light. Before mounting, Clara took the broken cinch from her satchel. She had carried it since the court hearing without deciding why. Now she walked to the nearest burned pine and tied the strap around a low dead branch. Nishi watched. It will rot there, he said. Yes. You said you wished to keep it. I have kept what I needed. She tightened the knot. The frayed leather hung against black bark, no longer part of a saddle, no longer hidden in her bag. On the ride home, the mountain wind rose. It carried the smell of distant rain. Clara noticed her body tense. She looked at the sky. The clouds were far south, moving away. She kept riding. That evening, someone knocked on the cabin door. Nishi opened it to find Silas Vance's former foreman standing on the porch. The man held his hat in both hands. Without Vance behind him, he appeared younger and more tired. I came for the cattle near the lower spring, he said. 6 head. They crossed before the ruling. Nish did not move from the doorway. They are in the west pen. The foreman nodded. I'll take them and go. Clara came to stand beside Nishi. Mr. Vance sent you? No, ma'am. Mr. Vance left for Tucson 2 days ago. Bank calls fee did not help. There was no pleasure in the news, only consequence. The man looked toward the barn. He said the valley was full of thieves. Clara leaned on the doorframe. He may find Tucson crowded. The foreman almost smiled. Nishi walked with him to release the cattle. Clara watched from the porch while the 6 animals moved through the gate and down the road. No gun was drawn, no threat returned. The land simply closed behind them. When Nish came back, he carried a coil of wire over one shoulder. Vance's men cut the west fence when they drove them in, he said. Tonight? Tomorrow. Clara glanced at the darkening sky. That is sensible. Nishi set the wire near the shed. Practical. She looked at him sharply. He knew the history of that word now. His face was calm, but there was a question in it. Clara stepped closer. Practical can be kind, she said, when no one is being sold. Nishi's gaze held hers. The distance between them had once been measured in paces, doorways, bed widths, and the reach of a hand. Clara had needed every inch of it. He had given it without complaint. Now she closed the space herself. She placed her hand against his chest, over the place where she had heard his heart while he carried her through the storm. Beneath her palm, the rhythm was as steady as she remembered. Nish did not touch her. May I? He asked. Clara knew what he meant. Yes. He lifted one hand and rested it lightly against the side of her face. His thumb stopped below the scar at her temple, leaving her room to turn away. She did not. Their first kiss was brief and careful. It held no demand, no claim, no sudden transformation. When Nishi stepped back, Clara's hand remained on his chest. The partnership is changing, she said. It can change slowly. It will. Yes. That night, Nishi spread his blanket near the hearth as usual. Clara looked from him to the empty right side of the bed. You can sleep here, she said. He did not move immediately. Are you certain? No, Clara answered, but I am willing. Nish folded the blanket and placed it on the mattress. He lay above the covers, leaving a clear space between them. Clara listened to his breathing for a while. Then she slept. Morning found Clara awake before the fire. For a confused instant, she felt the warmth of another body near the right edge of the mattress, and every old alarm rose at once. Her eyes opened. Nishi lay on his back above the quilt, exactly where he had settled the night before. One arm rested across his stomach. His boots stood beside the hearth. The space between them remained untouched. Clara listened until the alarm passed. Nishi opened his eyes. He did not turn toward her. Good morning, you were awake. Yes. How long? Not long. You did not move. You were sleeping. Clara pushed herself upright. The ankle felt stiff but sound. This arrangement may require rules. Nishi sat up. Then make them. No reaching for me while I sleep. Agreed. If either of us wants the other to leave the bed, we say it plainly. Agreed. And you do not surrender the entire mattress because I turn over once. Nishi looked at the narrow space he occupied. That rule may require practice. Clara drew the quilt around her shoulders. You are larger than the practice allows. That was true before the rule. She laughed softly. They rose and began the morning work. Nishi brought in kindling while Clara mixed cornmeal with water and a pinch of salt. The familiar tasks steadied what the night had changed. She greased the skillet. He ground coffee. Their shoulders brushed once near the stove. Neither apologized. At the table, Clara opened the household ledger and drew a new line beneath the previous week's entries. Nishi watched her write. What is that? 2 panes of glass received from Mrs. Vale. 4 dozen eggs promised by Mr. Dobbs. 1 piglet, current location uncertain. The piglet squealed beneath the porch, as if objecting to the description. And the new rule? Nishi asked. Clara glanced up. Rules of the bed are not ranch accounts. Why not? Because I refuse to make a written contract for every human interaction. You made one for marriage. That was filed by a clerk. And this? She closed the ledger. This is ours. Nishi held her gaze, then nodded. After breakfast, they repaired the west fence together. Clara carried staples in a canvas pouch and held the wire while Nishi tightened it. The work required them to coordinate every movement. When he pulled, she braced. When she called the line straight, he drove the staple. By midday, 400 yards of boundary stood taut between new posts. At the final post, Clara ran one hand along the wire without touching the barbs. This is what Vance never understood, she said. The fence? The work, he thought ownership began when a paper said yes. Nishi set the hammer through his belt. Paper can protect work. It can also hide the lack of it. They looked down the repaired line. Beyond it, the western range lay empty of Vance cattle. Nishi reached for the staple pouch. His fingers brushed Clara's. This time, neither pulled away. Summer came quickly after that. The cabin door stood open most mornings. Dust replaced mud in the yard. Clara's limp lessened until it appeared only when she was tired. The cedar cane moved from beside the bed to a hook near the door, then remained there for days at a time. On Thursdays, people climbed the mountain with papers. Mr. Dobbs brought a creek map that placed half his orchard in a river. Mrs. Vale brought probate notices and 3 children who discovered the hens. A Mexican freighter named Tomas Ortega arrived with tax receipts folded inside his hatband. Clara spread each problem across the large table and made columns. Nishi added a bench along the wall. Your table was not large enough, he said. The floor was available. Mrs. Vale's youngest tried to eat a harness rivet. A bench is reasonable. They charged no money from neighbors who had none. Payment came as eggs, nails, a sack of beans, 2 panes of glass, and once a piglet that escaped beneath the bed. Clara recorded every exchange anyway. The ranch changed by degrees. They fenced the spring with 36 rails. They replaced the juniper posts with cedar. They repaired the roof over the tack room and added a second small window to the cabin. The old gray mare became Clara's regular mount. The bay gelding that had thrown her was sold to a mail carrier who preferred nervous horses and had the sense to use new tack. In early autumn, Clara and Nishi rode to the high pasture to mark the site of a line shack. The grass reached the mare's knees. Crickets moved through it in dry waves. Above the canyon, clouds gathered around the peaks, but the air remained warm. Clara stopped near the stone marker and looked over the land. The shack should face southeast, she said. Morning light will dry the door after snow. The wind comes from the west. Then the west wall gets no window. Stone foundation, 2 courses, 3 on the uphill side, cider roof, pine rafters. Cedar costs too much. Nishi looked at her. You have become cruel to cedar. I have become accurate about freight charges. They dismounted and walked the rectangle, setting small stones at each corner. Clara measured by pace, then checked with a rope. When they finished, evening had begun to color the sky. Nishi stood beside the marker. Wind moved his hair and carried the scent of sage across the ridge. Clara looked at the boundary that had once existed only as a disputed line in a box of damaged papers. Now she could see the repaired fences, the protected spring, and cattle grazing where they belonged. We will need another keg of nails, she said. 2-1 for the shack. Half a keg remains in the barn. The barn nails are small, Clara frowned. You used the large ones? For the spring rails. You did not enter that. You were standing beside me. That is not an entry. Nishi held out his hand. Clara stopped arguing. His palm was open, scarred by rope and work. The gesture contained no urgency. It was the same kind of offer he had made with a blanket, a forearm, a grooming brush, a place beside him. She put her hand in his. They stood at the edge of the pasture while the sun lowered behind the mountains. Orange light spread across the canyon wall that Vance's false survey had tried to turn into a line. The stone did not care what had been written about it. It held its shape. Clara listened to the horses cropping grass behind them. The numbers still came to her, but they had changed. 36 rails around the spring, 26 posts on the lower fence, 2 panes of glass, 1 bench for neighbors, a line shack before winter. Figures were no longer a wall built against betrayal. They were measurements for things not yet made. Nishi's hand remained warm around hers. Do you regret the door? She asked. He knew which door she meant. No, neither do I. Below them, the cabin roof caught the last of the sun. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin, straight line. It was not the largest ranch in the territory. It did not need to be. Its fences stood, its books balanced. Its table had room. Years later, the line shack would become a second house. The second house would become a barn when their family needed more rooms. Children would learn to ride on the old gray mare's descendants and to check every strap before trusting it. They would hear how a forged patent failed against a canyon wall and how a woman with a healing ankle walked into court carrying a ledger. The story would grow in the telling, as stories do. The storm would become colder. The distance Nishi carried Clara would become longer. Vance would acquire more hired men and a darker coat. But the things that mattered would remain plain. He found her because he went looking. She trusted him because he never demanded it. They kept the land because neither treated the other as a burden. On the ridge, before any of those later voices existed, Clara leaned her shoulder against Nishi's arm. The first star appeared above the pines. We should go, she said. The temperature is dropping. Yes, neither moved for another minute. Then they mounted and rode home together, following the fence line through grass washed gold by the final light.